When most people face a critical decision, they freeze, their minds sliding into that familiar spiral of what-ifs and worst-case futures, weighing every variable as if the world will pause for them to feel safe. And in that pause, the moment slips away, the conversation moves on. The opportunity passes to the person who didn't wait to feel certain, because certainty never comes on its own. Machiavelli understood this with a clarity that frightened his rivals. He knew hesitation destroys more possibilities than bad choices ever will. His strength wasn't mystical intuition or luck. It was velocity with purpose, movement with design, decisions made at the right altitude of mind, stripped of noise and sharpened by principles. He didn't search for perfect information. He searched for leverage, and then he moved. He treated decision-making like a weapon, not a wish. He forged a set of laws he could reach for in the heat of uncertainty, rules that cut through fog and fear like a blade through cloth. They weren't slogans, they were habits you train until they live in your bones, and once they're in you, the world feels slower, simpler, more obedient, because you no longer beg for the right moment, you create it. Law 1 begins where most people fail, at the starting line of the mind. Never decide in neutrality. Neutrality is a costume you put on to hide the truth that your emotions have already voted. He would say, never decide from balance. Decide from alignment. Alignment means you know exactly what you are optimizing for before you choose, and you say it to yourself without decoration. Most people think they're deciding between two options, but they're deciding between two fears: fear of regret or fear of loss. If you don't name the fear names the path. He would pause and ask, am I moving towards something I want or away from something I fear? And he would wait just long enough to kill the second one, because a decision made by fear isn't yours. It belongs to the enemy within. Do this in practice. Before the meeting, before the call, before the yes or the no, write one line. I am optimizing for X, and if you can't name X, you have no business choosing yet because your mind is lying to you about being neutral. Law 2 is the antidote to visible weakness. When in doubt, act towards strength. In court, in council, on the street, he knew people smell uncertainty like blood and water. Acting in strength doesn't mean false bravado. It means choosing the path that communicates control, even if both routes are risky. If you must fail, fail in a way that increases your perceived authority. That could mean taking a smaller, clean loss now to set up a larger win next. It could mean a decisive no when a mushy maybe would please the room. It could mean stepping forward first to define the terms instead of reacting to someone else's frame. Power is largely a theater of signals. Appear controlled and the room adjusts around you. Appear apologetic and the room devours you. He coached princes to project steadiness when their stomachs knotted with doubt, because perception is currency in unstable markets. And when the market is human emotion, your balance sheet is posture, tone, tempo. Choose the option that hardens your silhouette. Law 3 is the law that liberates the decisive from the polite. Delay is a decision. Waiting is never neutral. Every delay cedes terrain to someone else's agenda. Every pause creates space for your opposition to arrange the pieces. He made a precise distinction that most never learn: the difference between delay and timing. Delay is passive and leaks status. Timing is active and collects it. You wait only when the waiting itself pressures the enemy, reveals the mask, or deepens your leverage. If it does not, you move. He would say, if you can't decide, then decide that you will decide. Force motion, because clarity accumulates once reality starts pushing back. In his world, time wasn't a cushion. It was a battlefield with moving fronts. On a battlefield, you don't stall in the open while you draft a perfect plan. You sprint to cover and make the next choice from there. Law 4 teaches you to listen to your mind in the right sequence. Emotion, logic, strategy. 3 voices, 1 decision. The first answer your body gives is emotional, a survival pulse that says, protect me. make the pain stop, avoid shame. The second is logical, the internal accountant that lists pros and cons and often makes you feel smart while keeping you in place. The third is strategic. It asks the only question that matters to power: which choice increases my influence long term? Machiavelli trained himself to hear the first voice, ignore it, hear the second, use it, and then act on the third. That training doesn't take years. It takes repetition under pressure until your reflex is to translate a situation into long-term advantage rather than short-term relief. He didn't think in yes or no. He thought in, what does this make possible in 3 moves? When you start thinking like that, your choices stop being isolated events and become a narrative you control. Law 5 discards the obsession with perfect facts. When information is uncertain, trust patterns, not promises. People lie with words. They confess with repetition. A courtier can flatter on Monday and flatter on Tuesday and flatter on Wednesday, and you'll be tempted to believe him on Thursday. Machiavelli ignored Thursday's sentence and studied the week. Who do they defer to when the powerful leave the room? Whom do they insult when they think there is no cost? How do they respond to a small boundary? Your eyes harvest patterns faster than your logic can process a paragraph. He used that speed as an edge. He didn't need to know the entire truth about a person. He only needed a reliable pattern he could bet against. Pattern recognition lets you act in minutes where other people take months. It is not cynicism. It is respect for human nature's consistency. Law 6 is the one polite minds misquote and soft minds fear. Never choose the choice that flatters your morality. Choose the choice that builds your power. He didn't advocate cruelty for its own sake. He despised theatrics. He believed so-called moral frames are often installed by the already powerful to police the ambitions of those below. He measured a decision by what it caused, not how it looked in the moment. If the moral path and the powerful path aligned, he took it and called it fortune. If they diverged, he didn't let the crowd's story about goodness override the reality of consequence. Mercy that endangers order is sentimental weakness. Severity that secures stability is mercy in disguise. This is not a license to be monstrous. It is a command to evaluate with adult eyes what keeps your house standing when the storm comes. Law 7 is the knife that cuts through fog when nothing else does. When the noise is loud and the variables multiply, ask one question: who wins if I fail? Names will appear in your mind, faces you've tried to ignore. That answer narrows the path. If this delay gives them room, you move now. If this concession feeds their appetite, you refuse now. If this apology strengthens their narrative, you stay silent. Seeing who benefits from your hesitation is like seeing the wind's direction in the grass. You don't need the wind's biography. You only need to know which way to lean. These laws don't live in a book. They live in your rhythm. Machiavelli didn't wait for crisis to practice them. He rehearsed when things were quiet so he could execute when things were violent. That's the difference between people who seem to decide instantly and people who claim they need more time. The fast ones practiced in advance. The slow ones are improvising under fear. He built readiness as a state, not an event. He would stand at a window in the morning and run silent calculations. If this ally shifts loyalties, who stands to gain? If this favor is granted, who will resent it tomorrow? If the crowd praises me today, who sharpens a blade in private tonight? It wasn't paranoia, it was preemptive clarity. He treated surprise as a tax on the unprepared and refused to pay it. Part of that readiness was learning when not to decide, which confuses amateurs and terrifies those who need your answer to anchor their own. Withholding a decision is power when the withholding exposes other people's motives, flushes out their desperation, or forces them to reveal their hidden alliances. 2 factions pressed him for a stance. He'd withhold it and watch who rushed to bribe, who resorted to rumor, who hardened their posture, and who softened. His silence wasn't confusion. It was a laboratory. He used time like light to make the concealed patterns visible, but he never let silence harden into avoidance. He knew the thin border between strategic patience and cowardice and refused to cross it. He also waged war on the most common enemy of sharp judgment, the need to be right. Human beings crave being right more than being effective. That craving turns decisions into identity, and once your decision becomes your ego, you can't update it without feeling like you are breaking yourself. He did the opposite. He treated decisions like experiments and himself like a scientist. If it worked, repeat with more force. If it failed, extract the data and adjust quickly. He believed power belongs to those who correct fastest, not those who hesitate longest. That mindset detonates the paralysis of perfectionism. You stop delaying in pursuit of the right decision and start moving in pursuit of the fitting decision, the one that fits the current terrain with the information you have and creates more information by moving. That movement trained his intuition. People talk about gut instinct like magic. For him, it was compressed experience, logic that had been digested so thoroughly it no longer needed speech. He called it controlled impulsiveness, the willingness to act with the confidence of instinct after you've trained the instinct to be worthy of trust. He did not hide from volatile rooms. He entered them to feel how people break when stress rises. He wanted his nervous system to recognize the micro-signals that precede betrayal, retreat, or courage. After enough repetitions, his snap judgments were better than most people's whiteboard plans, because he had banked thousands of tiny lessons that never made it into a memo. He had another private practice that preserved his edge. He hunted for his own weak reflexes and punished them. Never decide in a way that flatters your weakness. Everyone has a soft place inside the mind that asks for comfort, for applause, for safety. He studied his so intimately that he could feel when a choice was about to cater to it. If his weakness wanted to be liked, he chose the path that risked offense. If it wanted to avoid tension, he walked into it. If it wanted to talk, he stayed silent. He did not mistake that discipline for coldness. He considered it respect for his future self. A leader who indulges his present softness mortgages his future strength. Clarity, to him, wasn't found, it was made. You create clarity by collapsing possibilities into choices and choices into motion, so reality gives you feedback. The man who waits for clarity first waits forever. The man who moves first gets clarity as a gift from consequence. That's why he could step without apologizing. He trusted action over rumination because action reveals the actual shape of the terrain. The mind alone invents mountains where there are none. There is a peace that comes from living like this, not the peace of being untouched by struggle, but the peace of knowing you will not betray yourself when pressure rises. When chaos hit a room, he did not become louder, he became slower. People follow the slowest pulse when they are afraid. If your voice is unhurried, the room unconsciously borrows your certainty. He set tempo to set perception, because the one who controls tempo controls interpretation, and the one who controls interpretation controls reality. That is why he could win a room without winning the argument. He didn't need to. He won the rhythm. He also understood timing as leverage, not luck. A right decision delivered at the wrong moment becomes a wrong decision. So he watched the mood of the crowd like a general watches wind and water. When sentiment swelled, when vanity peaked, when fear made people crave a savior, he acted, not because the action was different, but because the appetite for it was finally there. He looked supernatural to observers who didn't see the alignment underneath. They called it fortune. He called it listening. At times, he even chose to look wrong on purpose. Predictability is a map your enemies can read. If they can chart your ethics, your pace, your tells, they can box you in with a story about who you are. So he broke his own pattern occasionally with a visible misstep to reset their expectations. He would let the court snicker at a small blunder while he moved a larger piece under the table. Let them think he lost the thread. He never did. He was weaving the next tapestry. He saw every choice as a wave with echoes. He asked not just what happens if I do this, but what precedent does this set? What permission does it grant others? What habit does it install in me? What alliances does it quietly signal? What doors does it close so others open? He thought in sequences instead of moments. That habit is available to anyone. When you stand at your next fork, stop asking which branch feels safer. Ask which branch sets in motion 3 outcomes you can use. He filtered opportunities with a simple triad. Protect, expand, reveal. Does this decision protect something essential I already control? Does it expand my reach into an arena I can hold? Does it reveal truth I need about my allies, my enemies, or myself? If it did none of those, it was distraction with a shiny face. He could say no in seconds because he measured with that ruler instead of asking a committee inside his head for permission. He built the environment to make decisiveness easy. He did not drown in counsels of the cautious. He surrounded himself with observers rather than debaters, people who brought him patterns and pulse rather than opinions dressed as warnings. Consensus is a comfort drug. He kept it off his table. He preferred to offend timidity than to sacrifice advantage to a room that would never share the consequences of his choice. He kept a private compass for the worst days, an axis of clarity that cut chaos into usable pieces. When variables multiplied and the urge to delay felt noble, he reduced the scene to 3 truths. What cannot be changed? What can be influenced? What must be destroyed? He refused to waste energy on the unchangeable, redirected force to the influenceable, and did the difficult thing quickly when something corrosive had to be ended. He believed confusion is often self-deception in a nice suit. We say, I don't know what to do when we mean I don't want to do what I already know will cost me comfort. His relationship to failure was colder than his enemies could comprehend. He did not fear wrong decisions because he did not interpret them as moral stains. He saw them as tuition. Every mistake purchased a piece of insight. The only unforgivable error was repeating one. He also remembered that the human brain confuses familiarity with correctness. It will try to lure you into choices that preserve a comfortable identity rather than build a powerful future. So when 2 options felt equally uncomfortable, he chose the one that expanded control rather than the one that restored ease. Sometimes he chose discomfort deliberately, just to remind his nervous system who was in charge. He leveraged pressure as a magnifier. In calm rooms, people hide. In hot rooms, people reveal. He would introduce mild stress, a deadline, a public commitment, a forced choice, and then watch who panicked, who attacked, who negotiated, who steadied. That kind of observation trains your judgment more in a week than reading 100 clever essays. Decisions don't just shape the world outside you. They expose the hierarchy inside you. He would say a man's decisions tell you what he worships, and if you consistently choose the option that protects comfort over the option that builds capacity, it is not a mistake, it is a religion, and the god is softness. He kept himself unreadable. He valued consistency of principle, but variability of move. One day patient, the next unyielding, one day outwardly merciful, the next harder than stone. He refused to let anyone build a reliable script about his responses because scripts invite traps. Those who appear perfectly consistent are easier to ambush because their next step is already in the enemy's notebook. He preserved mystery without being erratic by anchoring every visible switch to the same invisible rule. Does this advance control of outcomes? If it did, the change was justified, even if observers called it contradiction. He trusted the invisible architecture of human rhythm more than the visible ornament of arguments. He controlled tempo, staging, and framing. He was quiet when others screamed. He accelerated when others yawned. He spoke last when speaking last made the room regret its earlier certainties. He understood that the first person to set the frame controls the language, but the last person to slow the frame controls the verdict. You can install all of this in your life starting today. Begin with a daily drill that takes 5 minutes. Write the one thing you are optimizing for this week. Not 5, 1. That is alignment. Choose one habit that acts toward strength when you feel doubt. That is posture. Choose one decision you will make before noon each day that moves a key piece forward whether or not you feel ready. That is velocity. At night, record one pattern you noticed in a person you rely on, and one pattern you noticed in yourself you will not flatter tomorrow. That is pattern and anti-weakness. When chaos rises, run the axis. What cannot be changed? What can be influenced? What must be destroyed? That is surgical clarity. Before any high stakes yes, ask who wins if I fail. That is the cut through fog. And when your stomach tightens, listen for the 3 voices: emotion, logic, strategy. That is the sequence of a grown mind. Along the way, you will hear the crowd. They will call you cold because you do not perform your doubts for their comfort. They will call you reckless because you did not wait to gather 1,000 opinions that conflict anyway. They will call you lucky when your timing aligns with human appetite and your move looks blessed by fortune. Smile. Fortune loves the prepared pulse. The world remembers those who moved in the storm as if the storm was choreography. It forgets those who stood under the awning rehearsing speeches about the rain. If this is the moment you are tired of freezing while your life waits on the other side of your hesitation, make a small decision now to anchor the shift, like the lesson to mark it in your mind. Share it with one person who dithers until they suffer. Subscribe so this practice compounds. Not for me, for the rhythm in you that wants out of limbo. We finish where he began, with a single conviction that made him terrifying to those who preferred theory to consequence. It is better to shape fate than to study it. He did not ask what life planned for him. He planned for life, and he accepted the cost of that posture without apology. While others analyzed endlessly, he acted, and in action, he found a clarity thought alone never gives. He looked at indecision as a disease dressed in caution, cured not by more thinking, but by motion, observation, and correction. Decide, observe, adapt. That is the loop that builds empires and quiets the noise in your chest. You do not need to become heartless to live like this. You need to become disciplined about where your heart belongs. Place it in outcomes, not optics. Place it in structures that endure, not sentiments that seduce. Place it in the future you are building with the choices you make when no one is there to praise you. The person who can decide clearly while everyone else panics holds the room without raising a voice. The person who can move first and correct faster will look prophetic to slower minds. The person who stops flattering his weakness and starts training his instinct will feel a kind of freedom that doesn't need permission. The laws are simple. Never decide in neutrality, align. Act towards strength when doubt whispers. Treat delay as a decision unless waiting squeezes advantage. Hear emotion, consider logic, obey strategy. Trust patterns over promises when facts are fog. Favor the choice that builds durable power, not the one that flatters your virtue theater. And when nothing else is clear, ask who wins if I fail and deny them the feast. Layer on the rhythm. Rehearse when calm so you execute when burning. Hold back your answer when silence draws masks into the light. Correct faster than you defend your pride. Train your instinct by walking into pressure, not around it. Break your pattern before your enemies learn it. Control tempo so interpretation bends in your direction. Filter every opportunity through protect, expand, reveal. Use the axis when chaos swells, and never decide in a way that feeds the softest part of you. Do this and you'll notice something peculiar. You stop asking for the right decision. You start shaping right outcomes. People will say you always seem to know. The secret is, you decided before they started thinking, and when they finally do, it will be inside the frame you set. That is power without shouting, clarity without apology, motion without permission. That is how Machiavelli moved through storms, like they were scripted, and how you will move through your own once you stop waiting for certainty to knock on your door. If this straightened your spine, press like to tell your future self you meant it. Share it with a friend who lives in maybe. Subscribe, because next, we go deeper into the art of timing and pressure, how to place decisions where they bend other people's choices without them noticing, how to use silence like a blade and visibility like bait. Until then, carry this with you. The world doesn't reward the smartest thinker in the room. It rewards the one who moves first with conviction and learns faster than anyone else alive. In a century of hesitation, certainty is supremacy. Decide.